Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. We've just finished part 1 of Samuel's journal. Samuel went from the packet service delivering mail and freight to the transport service where his ship transported troops from various fronts, including the evacuation of New York. Eventually, Samuel found himself near St. Augustine, Florida for several months, where the Spanish were taking control of the area. After an extended time in this climate, Samuel returned home to Great Britain, where we find him now. I hope you enjoy part 2 from the Journal of Samuel Kelly, where he becomes mate in the coasting trade. I found my brother a high-spirited young man of good abilities. He informed me that he was now preparing to be examined to pass for a 4th mate for the ship Earl Cornwallis from Canton, without going through the degrees of 6th and 5th mates. Not having seen my brother a long while before this, I was determined to stay a few weeks with him, and then pay a visit to my relations in Cornwall. I now began to provide a good stock of clothes, either to appear as a gentleman or as a Jack Tar. I also laid in a stock of useful books, and remitted a bank post bill of £20 to my uncle to remain in his hands until my arrival in the West. My brother appeared to be possessed of all that spirit and generosity incident to the character of British seamen, and as he had nearly cleared the gains of his late voyage, he was ready to assist in reducing mine, and was so lavish of his money that I have known him when intending to cross Tower Hill to get a shilling exchanged for halfpence to supply the numerous mendicants. As this was a common custom with him, as soon as he was discovered on the hill, you might see the lame, lazy, and maimed all in motion, directing their course to a well-known benefactor. The tailor who made my clothes had a wife greatly afflicted with asthma. Her day was spent in leaning over a chair back, and at night kneeling by her bedside with her day clothes on, and I think she told me that she had not been in bed for some years. Her spirits appeared lively, and she pronounced her words with the greatest rapidity. My brother, being a good pilot in London, I put myself under his direction, and in one of our rambles, passing through St. James Park, I met Colonel B.'s lady and 2 of her daughters. The young ladies knew me immediately, but their mother only recollected being familiar with my features, without being able to call me by my name, and well she might be at a loss, for I had exchanged my old sea clothes for a fashionable blue coat, ruffled shirt, etc., with my hair dressed and powdered. As I did not like squandering away my money, I only went once to Drury Lane Theatre, and then merely to see the King, Queen, and family, and instead of frequenting a place of worship on Sundays to return thanks for the numberless mercies I had experienced during my voyage, I spent the Sabbath in wandering about and in paying visits. I had lent my brother 10 guineas besides treating him occasionally, but he was very desirous to obtain a further sum, which I resisted, and as I had little more money than what would serve till my arrival in the West, I was determined to go to Falmouth by sea, and took my passage in the cabin of a trader for a guinea. My brother followed me to the vessel, and by entreaty procured from me a half-guinea more, which, as I never saw him after, remains unpaid. After having been in London above a month, I sailed for the Downs. In the Downs we experienced much blowing weather, and after trying to get round the South Foreland, we were forced to run for Ramsgate Pier, and in going in broke the arm of one of our bower anchors. Here we lay against a narrow quay in a tier of vessels for a great while, and as all the vessels had fires on deck, I have seen the sparks of fire flying over the brig, and from the carelessness of our crew the scuttle was sometimes lifted off where the gunpowder was kept. This being the case, I was not very fond of staying on board in the daytime, and to avoid resorting to a public house, I used to wander about the fields on the Isle of Thanet. We at length sailed, and at last reached Falmouth after being full 5 weeks on our passage. The captain charged me a shilling per day for my victuals during the whole time, though I assisted in working the vessel, and though my clothes were much injured in my chest by wet. It would have been cheaper had I come by coach. Having informed my friends in the West of my arrival, I stayed here a few days, and then rode to the town where I had been about 7 years at school. There I stayed a day or 2 with some of my old playfellows who wished me to stay to dance at the assembly. I had been a considerable time in the boroughs at the dancing school in the days of my youth and vanity, under the tutelage of Monsieur Thulier, a Frenchman, and was very fond of this exercise, but I now declined. I now rode to my native place at the western extremity of Britain, and found a welcome reception from my relations. My sister was a little girl when I had last seen her, but now she was a woman, At this place I received the most marked attention from all orders and degrees of people, from the mayor to the town crier, and from the church minister to the sexton, most of the grown people having known me from my infancy. Having dined with a gentleman here, after dinner he produced a bottle of Jamaica rum to make some punch, which spirit had been presented to him by my father when master of the ship General Wolfe, which vessel was stranded in this bay before my parents were married, and which my friend had preserved till this time to entertain me. My brother had now prevailed on my Uncle W. to join him in the bond of £50, to provide necessaries for his voyage to China, for which place he sailed in the spring of 1786. But on his passage, most of the officers of his ship being North Briton, my brother and them did not agree, and he therefore, on arrival of the ship in China, quitted her to go into the country vessel, after which I never heard what became of him correctly, therefore I imagine he soon after paid the debt of nature. I now obtained a few articles left by my father, viz. A silver watch, shoe, knee and stock buckles, his shaving apparatus, a few old sea charts, a quadrant made by Davis, and a hat. His clothes my brother had long since received. My Uncle W., with whom my sister resided here, had sunk a great part of his money, gained when captain of a Guineaman out of Liverpool, in shipping and the mines. He had still an estate in the eastern part of this country, which might bring in about £70 per annum. The only life remaining was that of his only daughter, and she was now in bad health. My uncle, expecting her death, sold this estate for about £200, after which his daughter lived about 20 years. As my uncle was a very moral, prudent man, I cannot account for his losses to anything so much as from the property being obtained in the slave trade. In January 1786, a second crop of apples, as large as walnuts, was gathered from a tree in a relation's orchard while I remained here. A cousin of mine, a native of this place, had been many years master of a brig in the coasting trade between Bristol and Liverpool, and his vessel had been lately run down and sunk by another brig in the Channel, part of the crew being drowned, while himself, a woman passenger, and several others got on board the other vessel and were preserved. He had just agreed in Bristol for building a new vessel, and was now come here on a visit. He proposed taking me as a chief and only mate in the new brig if I was willing, to which I assented. In some part of February 1786, we took our passage from Bristol in an old brig, the Nancy, and having got under sail, the pilot leaving us, discovered a hole under the brig's quarter, which had been broken by another vessel in the great surf running in the pier. This was a very providential discovery, as we were to encounter very rough gales in our passage, the brig being also ancient and decayed. We had now to wait in the bay, while the pilot went on shore to procure some sheet lead to nail over the hole. This being effected, we sailed, and with great exertion got as far as Aberthaw, from which place we were forced to run for Ilfracombe, where we lay many days waiting for moderate weather, my cousins having set out by land from hence for Bristol. The wind inclining to the south, we sailed. Soon after it veered again to the eastward. The second evening we got near the Holmes. About midnight on the height of the flood, we sheered in towards Woodspring, and came to an anchor. Soon after bringing up, the tide being very rapid, and having a man at the helm steering, we found that the anchor had started and continued to drag. The weather being very severe with an intense frost, the pilot did not like to leave the cabin fire, and the captain could not get 2 men on deck, which were benumbed with the cold. These 2, with the man to helm and the captain, 4 in all, made the whole crew. It was now found necessary to drop the other anchor, which was executed by myself and the captain, and we veered away the cable till both anchors brought her up. At daylight, the brig was covered with ice, and the cables were very thick. The tide of flood also coming on, it was determined to endeavor to get the anchors. The captain undertook to hold the cable, whilst I had got a handspike at the windlass, which kept my hands a great deal from the wet. Having secured the anchors, and in attempting to work the windward, the forestay sail blew away from the bolt rope, and the foretopsail split on the leach, which obliged us to run for Minehead. On getting near the place, we made a signal for a boat, but no one appearing, we proceeded for Ilfracombe once more. Our captain's finger, having been frostbitten in the morning, was turned very black. We got into the harbor before dark, having only about 1 meal of biscuits remaining on board. At this place I saw a large, handsome brig launched at low water. She was lowered on one side and launched on her bilge, The launch was well executed, and she ran off the ways nearly her length on the oar we'd laid for to receive her. Having repaired our vessel, we again sailed and reached Bristol in safety, and as I had been serviceable to the captain, he would have no money for my passage. During the passage, the captain was applied to for a chart that we might compute our distance from the headland, to which he replied that he believed there had never been such a thing on board the vessel, which I believe was fully 30 years old. In this vessel he had sailed from his apprenticeship and knew the Bristol Channel thoroughly, but when blown out of his old track he was totally at a loss. He once sailed from Hale for the Bristol Channel, and after having made a few tacks and supposing he was standing over the coast of Wales, he ran on shore in Mounts Bay. But he made his exit in his old track, having built a new vessel, and in running for Swansea struck on the Mixen sand, where the vessel went to pieces and he was drowned. He was a hardy little man, and so very courageous that having broken his leg by a fall from a ladder some time before, and after it had been set a considerable time, several splinters of bone used to work out. One day he informed me that having discovered a splinter, he was determined to extract it himself. Having prepared a razor or penknife, he requested the mate to hold the candle while he made an incision in his leg. The mate, attending closely to the process, fainted away, when the noble captain stopped short to assist his attendant by fetching a dram of brandy to revive him, and then went on with the operation. On my arrival at Bristol, I took lodgings where my relation lived, and found on inspecting the new vessel that she had little more than the lower footocks laid, and was not likely to be launched till June. I spent my time ranging round the country, and in copying verses and epitaphs into a book of 184 pages from the different repositories of the dead in this vicinity. Having now gone in the lower masts on the stocks, the brig was launched, and though the hatchways were not finished, I commenced sleeping on board immediately, and believe from this period to the end of April 1789, which was the whole time I acted as chief mate in this brig, Liverpool, and in the ship Thetis, I never slept a single night on shore, though within this time I had visited Liverpool, Almeria, Marseilles, Sicily, Gibraltar, Jamaica, London, and twice Philadelphia. In July 1786, we laid on the berth and loaded a general cargo for Liverpool. In going down the Avon, our vessel struck the ground, going through the cliffs, or cleaves, but did not stop. We, having reached Pill, moored there to wait for a wind. All our crew was to be paid by the run, which generally makes them think they have no right to work when windbound, but I endeavored to teach them that as they ate the provisions of the vessel, they were to do the work. One of these men, who had been an old Guineaman, I detected in stealing a piece of beef from the harness tub. But notwithstanding his dishonesty, he afterwards found means to get the command of a Guinea ship out of Liverpool. This man had given me such an account of the iniquity practiced in the slave trade that I determined never to go into that employ. We were several weeks in getting to Liverpool, where we discharged our cargo. I boarded while here at a public house, where all the masters and 3 regular traders to Bristol lodged when here. A maid of one of these vessels was now my companion, and the landlady, to make the most of her money, used to give us 2 milk with little sugar in it for supper, and at our breakfast we were often finished of bread and butter. I have known her mother, at 90 years of age, kept so short of victuals as to steal a round of the loaf when the servant was out of the way and hide it, she being only a kitchen guest. After loading principally with rock salt, we sailed for Bristol with a southerly wind, which towards evening blew very strong, and brought us under low sails, when it was determined to go into Holyhead to cut the distance short. Our master was determined to run within the Scary Island, a channel very narrow, with dangerous reefs of rocks on both sides, and no leading mark at night to direct the course. I was a stranger to this place, but knew sufficient to vote against the attempt, but the master, as if infatuated, was positive. The night was gloomy, and as we entered the channel, the water was much agitated like a pot boiling and foaming. Having reached the reef, running the length of half a mile of the island of Anglesey, we ran bounce against it. The next wave lifted us above the rocks, and when we were on the middle of the reef, we struck again, and the vessel swung round. All was immediately in confusion, and the master had disappeared. Under a supposition that as we were not afloat, the vessel would now sink in deep water, I ran below for the axe to cut the boat loose from her lashings. and having given orders to a man to execute this, I ran to sound the pump, and to my great joy found she had not sprung a leak. We found that we were now drifting toward the West Mouse, which providentially we cleared and steered for Holyhead Bay. In all our hurry, the master had not shown himself, but on my going into the cabin I found him there greatly terrified. We continued tacking in the bay till the tide answered, and then ran into Holyhead and moored. I have read somewhere that seamen are neither reckoned among the living nor the dead, their whole lives being spent in jeopardy. No sooner is one peril over, but another comes rolling on like the waves of a full-grown sea. In the Atlantic, one fright after another undermines the most robust constitution and brings on apparent old age in the prime of life. No trouble softens their hard, obdurate hearts, but as soon as the danger is past, they return in the greatest avidity to practice wickedness and blaspheme their Maker and Preserver. Our master, with a great fright, had taken to his bed and required great persuasion to get him to exert himself. I think we were 6 weeks in going to Bristol, having visited also Milford and Ilfracombe by reason of the blowing weather and foul winds. I hope you enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Check out the description to see how you can support this project and others. And tune in next time as Samuel sails to Philadelphia.